Hi there, my name's Richard Griffiths and I am the founder and creator of the Silk Road Virtual Museum. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today. It's a really important day for us because we'll be celebrating the first anniversary of our launch of what was the overland Silk Road, and today we're celebrating the launch of the maritime Silk Road. So this day is a mixture of both of these celebrations. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, those of you who have just happened to have clicked in or answered one of our adverts, but more especially the 20,000 or so people who in the last year have visited one of our exhibitions. And a special word of welcome to the 7,500 subscribers to our newsletter, and of course to the huge, wider Coursera community. Some of you followed my course, so if you did, special welcome to you. So here we are on a rather important day for us, but it's worth just reflecting for a second or two what our basic principles were. We formed the museum so that it would focus between roughly 500, the current era, and 1500, deliberately taking a cutoff point before the Europeans arrived. And that was to create an atmosphere rather than having a Eurocentric story, where the stories before the Europeans arrived actually told themselves, and to try to create an environment where people could learn to appreciate different and unfamiliar cultures. The second thing that we did was to try to keep the threshold to entry to us as low as possible. So we didn't go in for virtual reality at the time, because we felt it put too many barriers in the way of people who might like to use us and visit us, and would have been put off by the expense and the encumberment of these technologies. So we kept it simple. And the third principle we had was to include e-libraries, electronic libraries of free online resources to accompany all the exhibitions for people that want to look further. So what are we going to do today? Well, first of all, we're going to start with a walkthrough of our new maritime adventure. So that'll be the first video that'll be shown to you and be introduced by my great friend and colleague, Louisa Stewart. Then we shall have some expert commentaries on the work we're doing and the importance of it. And then finally, I shall have a question and answer session because we invited you to give some questions. And those that I've been able to answer online and in this context, I'll do. And for the rest, I'll be answering those personally by email later on. So it gives me great pleasure to turn over and hand over now to Louisa Stewart, who is the CEO from Blue Ninja and who's been supporting this project from the very beginning. So over to you, Louisa.
Welcome to the Silk Road Maritime Museum walkthrough. My name is Louisa Stewart, CEO of Blue Ninja, and I'm one of the partners working on this incredible project. We're excited to share this new chapter of the Silk Road Virtual Museum with you. When we started building the Silk Road Virtual Museum, we began with two sites, Nanjing in China and Venice in Europe. We selected Nanjing because it was the starting point for the first of the 7 so-called treasure voyages of Admiral Zheng He in the early 15th century. And we chose Venice because it had been the birthplace of the famous explorer Marco Polo. Although we filled in the rest of the continent with land-based trade routes and cultures, the exhibition was quite literally anchored at major seaports. In time, we extended the coverage of China back to the 7th century CE, with 2 exhibitions devoted to the Yuan, Lao, and Tang dynasties. And we added an exhibition dedicated to the Mamluks, who governed Egypt and Arabia for much of the 13th to the 15th centuries CE. In this introduction, we wish to take you through the new maritime sites and the wrecks of some of the ships that connected them. We start off the coast of Japan with a small island called Okinoshima. Passing China, we then visit the pre-colonial culture of the Philippines as a side trip on a shipwreck expedition. We will then visit the Champa culture of Vietnam that was eventually extinguished at the end of the 15th century. The next stop will be the Majapahit Empire, based in Java, or more accurately, its capital city Trau Lan. We will make 2 visits to Thailand, one to the Kingdom of Ayutthaya from its creation to 1500, and one to the Dvaravati culture of the 9th century, again as a side trip on a shipwreck exhibition. Our next visit to Sri Lanka, the jump-off point for many Buddhist monks heading to Southeast Asia and China, before visiting 2 trading hubs in Iran, Saraf and Hormuz. Our final exhibition is Calicut 1498. It also illustrates why the year 1500 CE is our cutoff point for the Silk Road Virtual Museum. Visitors to Calicut had always described the port as a prosperous trading hub with goods from Africa, Southeast Asia, and China. It was tolerant of different religions, well-run, honest, and efficient. In July 1497, a small fleet led by Vasco da Gama left Portugal in search of a gateway to the Indian Ocean. He arrived in Calicut in August of the following year, full of demands and precious little diplomacy, treated like a common trader and told to return when he could behave properly. For Europe, it is the beginning of a history. Here you see Vasco da Gama admiring a much later painting. For Europe, a beginning. For the maritime Silk Road trading system, an end. The Portuguese returned in September 1500 with proper credentials. They were recognized as new traders, but that was not their ambition. Not to join trade, but to dominate it, to monopolize it. Following the riot, after they had attacked another Islamic ship in port, they fled, leaving scores of dead behind them, and shelled the port. But all too soon they were back with larger fleets, more disruptions, more bombardments, until in 1509 they finally succeeded in destroying the combined Calicut and Ottoman fleets. Nothing more stood in their way. You may be excused for never having heard of Okinoshima. It is a small island off the coast of Japan with 1 inhabitant, a single Shinto priest guarding its secrets, and secrets it has. Not 1 leaf, not 1 stone should leave its shores. For us, it is a chance to learn about some immaterial cultural heritage, about the changing scale of rituals, the changing nature of ritual gifts, and the changing status of 3 local gods, all frozen in time for about 1,000 years. We explore the culture of the Philippines as part of a shipwreck exhibition, with the help of the Spanish invaders and, ironically, with the local authorities celebrating the 500th anniversary of those events. The Vietnamese Cham state reached its apotheosis in the 10th century, after which it faced continuous pressure from the Viet armies from the north. Its capital eventually fell in 1470 CE. Much of what remains are impressive stone statuary, which we are proud to display in a new exhibition site. We use the same space for our next exhibition, dedicated to the Majapahit Empire that ruled Java and much of Southeast Asia in the 13th and 15th centuries. In this museum, we focus on using the sandstone wall friezes to recreate the landscape in and around the former capital of Trau Lan. We make 2 visits to present-day Thailand, separated by several centuries due to the happenstance of selecting 2 wrecks from the area. The first visit is to Ayutthaya, a Buddhist kingdom that ruled from the mid-15th century onwards. And we return some 500 years earlier to admire the Dvaravati stone carved Wheels of Law that predated the physical portrayal of Buddha himself. From Thailand, we travel to Sri Lanka and the Anuradhapura kingdom that flourished from the 6th to the 10th century. In these years, Sri Lanka sat literally on the trading crossroads of the Indian Ocean and was a major departure point for hundreds of Buddhist monks traveling to Southeast Asia and China. From Sri Lanka, we travel to 2 sites in present-day Iran. We have already visited Calicut. Saraf is an archaeological site with remains from the mid-8th to the 10th centuries. It has delivered many interesting insights, including water provision in the desert environment, the different importance of regional as opposed to long-distance trade, and the influence of climate change on sea levels, and how even the smallest piece of glass or porcelain can unlock secrets to trading routes. Finally, Hormuz. Then, as now, a vital choke point en route to the Persian Gulf, and for that very reason, the Portuguese seized the port in 1507, all part of the all-conquering story of the discoveries, discovering what the local populations had known for centuries. And now onto the shipwrecks. For our shipwrecks, we have built a new underwater exhibition site, comprising of 3 rooms in each. We have 7 shipwreck exhibitions, chosen not so much for their location, as for the story they tell. Let's start with the Mongol invasion of Japan, in which Japan was saved by the divine wind, or kamikaze. We start by seeing the invasion through the eyes of a samurai, who complained that his deeds of valor had been unfairly overlooked, and employed a war artist to emphasize the point. We then turn to the revival of woodprint kamikaze art in the mid-19th century. In the final room, we work with local authorities to show the insights revealed by underwater archaeologists on what actually occurred all these centuries ago. The Shannan wreck, half a century later, shows a trade between China and Japan, but in this case, we know the exact loading date and the customer. The Nanhia 1, wrecked off the coast of China, was carrying Chinese goods to Southeast Asia, the largest quantity ever recovered. But what is truly remarkable is that not only was the cargo recovered almost intact, but the entire ship was lifted out of the water for excavation to continue on land. The 15th century Pandanan wreck, found off the coast of the Philippines, was selected because it was loaded mainly with champa ceramics from Vietnam and some interesting glass beads. For the same reason, the Satahip Koh Kram shipwreck was selected because it was loaded mostly with Thai and some Vietnamese ceramics. We chose the 6th wreck, Phanom Sarin, because it was one of the oldest ever recorded from the 8th century, because it was found on land, and because it offered us a wreck, but no cargo. However, it tells a story of its grounding and the efforts of the crew to refloat it, and offers tantalizing evidence on the basis of vegetative evidence, usually lost at sea. The choice of the 7th wreck was the most difficult. Maritime museums discourage the exhibition of cargoes and treasures recovered from commercially salvaged or treasure-hunted wrecks. In our museum of the 10th century Cirebon wreck, discovered off the coast of Java, we discuss the rights and wrongs of commercial salvage and, through the eyes of a government-appointed observer, unfortunately who was not allowed to observe much, we examine how to wreck a shipwreck. The opening of the maritime Silk Road has taken us, quite literally, into new waters, new forces of knowledge, new nuclei of beliefs, new forms of transport, and new compositions of cargoes, and new knowledge of the long-distance maritime routes before the arrival of the Europeans. Over the coming months, we will extend the coverage through time and space and look for new cooperations with academics and museum conservators alike. We hope that you will join us on this journey.
So thank you very much, Louisa, for that wonderful walkthrough. So now it gives me great pleasure to welcome here Professor Huang from the Silk Road University Network. He's the Secretary General of the network. And he has the great privilege of living in Samarkand. So I'm really jealous of that. But their support has been vital to us from the beginning. So it gives me great pleasure, Sungdong, to hand the program over to you. So thank you very much.
Congratulations on the first anniversary of the opening of the Silk Road Virtual Museum. I'm Professor Songdon Hwang, Secretary General of the Silk Road University's network, called SUN. SUN is a non-governmental, non-profit international organization established in 2015, aiming to preserve and promote the historical and civilizational values of the Silk Road through the collaboration of universities. Currently, we have 87 member universities in 65 cities across 28 countries, ranging from Portugal to Korea, along the terrestrial and maritime Silk Roads. As you know, the Silk Road is a treasury of human civilization exchange history, being the birthplace of the world's four great civilizations. The great exchanges of human civilization through the Silk Road have shaped the current modes of existence of humanity, that is, our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, knowledge, and technologies, and are imbuing a significant portion of our future. Thus, accurately understanding who, when, how, what, how, and why these exchanges occurred along the Silk Road is essential for grasping our current lives and anticipating future exchanges. While frequently visiting the Silk Road Virtual Museum, created by Professor Richard Griffiths, I have been captivated by several unique aspects of this museum. First, the quality of the Silk Road related artifacts that he has originally and digitally showcased is very intricate and high quality, making it feel like one is viewing the real items. Second, previous museums in the Silk Road regions have faced access limitations due to the inevitable temporal and spatial constraints. However, thanks to his efforts utilizing information and communication technology, anyone around the world can now deeply appreciate various previous artifacts from the Silk Road regions with profound and dignified commentary without needing to visit the site physically. Third, the artifacts from separate museums across different countries of the Silk Road can now be interconnected, allowing them to generate new values within the broader context of Silk Road civilizational exchange, thanks to his efforts. Fourth, the museum inspires many visitors to want to see and feel the various relics and artifacts of the Silk Road in person. I'm confident that many people are traveling to various Silk Road locations today. Those who visited the Silk Road Virtual Museum and later experienced the relics and artifacts in the respective regions will feel much deeper and see what others do not, as people tend to perceive only what they know and feel. Fifth, as a comprehensive outcome of these aspects, Professor Richard Griffiths' Silk Road Virtual Museum project expands people's empathetic reach regarding the values of the Silk Road, fostering potential for peaceful coexistence and co-prosperity among diverse cultures within within and beyond the Silk Road regions. The Silk Road Universities Network, alongside Professor Griffiths, has been preparing to establish the Silk Road Cultural Heritage Forum. The Silk Road Universities Network will actively support Professor Griffiths' Silk Road Virtual Museum project through this forum. Thus, we will happily participate in the endeavor to digitally showcase more diverse and invaluable artifacts from Silk Road civilization history in high quality via the Silk Road Virtual Museum as the years go by. Once again, I sincerely congratulate on the first anniversary of the Silk Road Virtual Museum. I firmly believe that this museum will be a prime example of the same, a modest beginning but a grand result. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Sung-dong, for those very generous comments. And now I'd like to welcome my friend and colleague, Martijn Manders, who is Professor of Underwater Archaeology and Underwater Cultural Heritage here at the University of Leiden, who's going to highlight some of the importance of the work that he and we have been doing in this field. So over to you, Martijn.
A lot of what happened at that period, who traded with whom and over what stretches, with what boats, and what was considered important, and who were these people, we don't know. And therefore the study of these maritime trade routes with their ancient shipwrecks, pre-European, let's say before 1500, is a treasure trove to learn more about the early trading. The maritime Silk Route, the spice trade, and the trade based on monsoon winds, like studied in the Indian Monsoon project. The focus on these trades may be largely unknown to us Westerners, even now. I will take you on a trip along several shipwreck sites, stepping stones of the past, ships that show us the many facets of international trade along the Indian Ocean coasts. Ships that wrecked and were found, ships that have been archaeologically excavated, but many also commercially looted. Their trade goods were often the reason for their looting.
So thank you very much, Martijn, for those observations. And now it gives me very great pleasure to turn to Jonah Markgraf, who is from Kunmextrix. And we have been working together from the beginning as she has put up with my repeated requests for help. Can you please show me how to do this? And requests of, can you now do the impossible, having managed the possible? So without Jonah and her continuous help, very little of this would have been possible. So Jonah, over to you.
Thank you for inviting me here and for the chance to speak a bit about the technical background of the museum. What is Kunstmatrix? The platform has been in existence since 2009, however mostly for commercial galleries and single artists. The museums came a bit later, and so did corporate cooperation projects and larger complexes. My name is Jonah Markgraf, their senior curation consultant. The greatest asset is probably the versatility of the tool in general, the flexibility of the developer team, and the dedication to come up with solutions for what is sought after in the art world. Videos and sculptures, for example, were a relatively quick addition, now easy to use even for those who only occasionally tap into newer media. With Kunstmatrix, it doesn't take very advanced technical skills to combine available elements into something new, exciting, convincing, and only happening virtually, in a setup that could never be achieved with a physical exhibition, such as in this case. Now let's enter with the guided tour, which is visible as a timeline at the bottom of the screen here. What is really spectacular about this exhibition? It's enticing our curiosity, both for the illuminated model in the back and the fish in the foreground. It's set clearly underwater, but otherwise it's undefined at first. The tour begins and we are introduced to the topic. With a custom design and plan in this case, the museum director had full control over the order of presentation, the architecture, and all surrounding areas, such as the light seeping through from the surface and the choice to equip the scene with different marine animals for each new edition or theme, like the location indicated Pacific, Atlantic Oceans, or the Chinese Sea. The mix of entertaining diversion and serious presentation of content is appealing to all audiences. This is making the whole experience a lot less dry and much more immersive, and still conveys loads of content. Info on pilot whales while in a shipwreck show, for example, might just be the odd thing to present something special that's well remembered by the audience later on. There is also the actual content of the exhibition, carefully lined up on the walls of the 3 coves here. In the guided tour, the viewer is carried through the rooms at optimum viewing distance, but they can of course roam freely as well, with their mouse tapping on the floor and the navigation arrows, or they can simply use their laptop keyboard. Objects and sculptures can be touched and inspected in detail view as well, quite a different experience not possible in a physical museum. Besides this, no visitation limits, no opening times, no boundaries of physical attention. The platform now earned 100% barrier-free status on Google's tests, suitable for tap navigation only, for example, or for impaired vision or impaired hearing. The mixing of media such as panels, charts, and photographic illustrations as sculptures in the space creates a great rhythm and keeps the visitor immersed in the story. What is so special about the Silk Road Virtual Museum? Its unusual presentation forms and being far more complex than possible in a physical museum. And by discovering our tools and making extremely creative use of them, it's inspiring and always impressive. The billboards and how they're used for the illustration, for example, the entire complex is jumpable with teleporters, keeping you on in the rooms and different aspects of the theme and across centuries. The navigation tools for the visitors are provided in-room, such as back to start, to the beginning of the tour, or resuming it from any point. This visitor menu is currently available in 10 languages, being expanded. English, German, French were the original 3, then followed by Italian, Arabic, Russian, and Polish. Now we added Spanish, Korean, and Japanese. There is also a flying shortcut tool from the list of works, or the in-room catalog. Clicking on the locator, the viewer is taken directly to the panel. Even a short technical excursion to wall text tools would be too long here, so basically you can just write on the wall or you can copy any text into this tool. Panels are made more elegant with frames. Wall text and large photo wallpapers can be integrated as well. All kinds of curating effects exist, and the results always depend on how these are applied each time. This varies the presentation forms, but still guarantees a professional look. The joy of discovery. Navigating through with the mouse or going step by step with the guided tour. Both options can be jumped on and off anytime. The Silk Road Virtual Museum is a best-case scenario by all means. The director has a vision, has the images, has the plan, has the patience and persistence to handle this with many artworks and theme rooms, and he has the abundant knowledge to turn this tool into a genuine teaching asset. Each exhibition comes with a catalog, automated with all listed artworks and editable for the curator. Easy download for visitors is always enabled. This was only a look into the presentation. In the form it can be viewed publicly by guests without a login. For curators, there are different menus, tools, statistics, and catalog layouts for professional use behind the scenes. So enjoy and learn and watch it grow and come back for the next exciting exhibition spaces. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Jonah, for that wonderful presentation, not just of what we're doing together, but also how you can actually navigate around the exhibitions. And I actually, shame to say, learned a few things myself. So, Jonah, thank you very much for the work and support you've given us all this time. Well, now it's time to turn to questions and answers. We put out a request for people to send us questions, and I've tried to answer them. And some of them I've answered directly and will answer directly because they're either too detailed or too up to date to really deal with in this context. And others I've chosen to answer here. So I'd like now to move on to the first of the questions from Benjamin Alungu from Namibia. And he asked, how did people navigate before modern tools? Well, basically the simple answer was by looking along the coast. And as they moved along the coast, they noted landmarks and dangers, and that sort of prepared them on how to sail. And of course, later on, they wrote that down so that other people could follow the same advice. And then gradually, then you passed on that knowledge from generation to generation. And as experience grew, they measured away from the coast, noting the color of the water, the flight of the birds, the depth from the sea bottom, and that all got passed on from one generation to the other. Then people started making sky charts. Now, sky charts date from millennia, and these were then used with fixed stars in the sky, which people used to line themselves up and identify where they were relative to the fixed stars that they were observing. Modern instruments, rather like the magnetic compass, came in much later. The magnetic compass, for example, comes in China in the 8th century of the current era. The quadrant, which is used to line yourself up, comes in the 15th century. And basically by that stage, people were traveling across the oceans using the monsoons and writing charts to each other, which more or less said travel so many distance and then turn right, then turn left, and working out that way. So basically they managed pretty well without the charts, but of course, it wasn't always successful, and they end up some stranded on reefs and wrecked, which gives us a lot of information for our museum. So thank you, Benjamin, for that answer. So the next question is from Terry Marsh in the United States. And he asked, how were goods carried on shore? Once they'd arrived on shore, how were they transported to Gaul? So I'm assuming that we're actually in the Roman period, i.e. up to about 400, 500, the current era. And the answer was that basically the ships would arrive at the port called Bernice in the North Sea, which is being excavated by archaeologists at this very moment. And that was a major port which linked up to the trade to India. Now from Bernice, they travel overland caravan up to Alexandria, travel by sea across the Mediterranean to the southern French coast, and then either by inland transport onwards, upwards, until they reached Gaul in the rather further north of France. So that was that question. Now we have a question from Harry Heckman from the Netherlands. And she basically asked that there's evidence from William Dalrymple, who wrote a book, The Golden Road. And he says that there are coins, a lot of Roman coins found in India, and that is evidence that the trade with China came via India. Now, don't like to make a controversy with such an eminent, and it really is a good book, by the way, such an eminent writer. But basically, the discovery of golden coins, Roman coins in India, refers to the Roman trade. And that was very much a very intense trade, which went from the northwest coast of India, Pakistan, India, current day Pakistan, India, then overseas up to Bernice, and then across up to the Roman Empire. The gold coins and the coins came in the other direction and are found then in India. It says very little or nothing at all then about the nature of trade after that date. And Harry, you had a second question. I'll come back to that later on as well. Thank you. So I'm going to try and pronounce this, but Klaus Samardzic from Slovenia, I apologize if I get it wrong, asked, is there any evidence of Chinese communities at the time of the Silk Road, maybe in Venice? Well, the answer, I'm sorry to say, is very simple. It's no. There's no recorded evidence of a community being in Europe. But of course, there might have been occasional visitors, monks, envoys, traders on their own way. And why was that? Well, because most of Europe's trade with China was indirect in this period via intermediaries in Persia or in the Arab states. So very little direct contact and very little evidence then that Chinese traders even reached that extent. So basically, no communities from China in the European ports and cities at that time. Now we get a very similar question from Judith Lerner from the United States. And she asks, can I discuss the presence of Sogdians in the maritime trade? Now, we actually have an exhibition devoted to the Sogdians called the Silk Road Traders. And we see how they were the intermediaries that spread through Central Asia and all into northern China, very much being the transmission belts of where these goods came. What are the humans that move them and trade them? Very often the Sogdians, and they did form large communities in the major trading hubs in China. Now, this was mostly focused in the Tang dynasty, and unfortunately, they got rather messed up in the Anlushan rebellion in the 9th century, and that rather broke their power altogether, and basically they fade from the picture. Now, we know that there was a community of Sogdians in Guangzhou in the Tang dynasty, but I don't think they were directly involved in the maritime side of the trade. The goods were coming on land, and the Sogdians would then be the intermediaries, taking them from the ports and distributing further inland. As I say, after the 10th century, they tend to disappear from the historical record. So that is the best I can do for that answer. So that was that question. And then we come to the last one. A question of, I missed one. Yes. You also asked then the question of the relative importance of the land and sea routes. Well, I have to confess here, we had no direct details of how many caravans or how many ships were engaged in any one year, or even in one decade, in the trade routes that we call the Silk Road routes. So I want to give you just a couple of ideas that give you an idea of the dimensions. I've been assured that an ordinary camel can manage about 200 kilograms, which seems a bit cruel, to be honest. So let's assume on average that a camel will take 150 kilograms. Over a 2-3 months journey, I even think that's an overestimate. And don't forget, the camel drivers have got to load and unload that every day, so they're going to be awfully happy if it's much heavier. The thing was that about half the goods carried on a caravan would be food for the camels. I mean, camels can go without water for a long time. They can't go without food. So if we looked at it, we could take an estimate that every camel would carry about 75 kilograms of trade goods. Now, let's look at a ship. Now, already in the over 1,000 years ago, a ship could carry between 200-300 tons and some even more. So let's take an idea of a ship carrying 200 tons of cargo. Now, if we look at how much that is in kilograms, because 100 kilograms, 1,000 kilos is a kilogram, then you see that one ship could carry a load for 2,500 camels. Camel trains are usually about 150. So that gives you an idea of the disproportionality between the two forms of transport. And I suspect that that will probably mean that a lot of the goods are, in fact, traveling by sea. But don't forget, not all goods travel directly from one end of the Silk Road to the other. Many are traded intermediary at ports and at hubs along the route, and might take 2 or 3 years by different people to reach at their end destination. So finally, we have a question from Miton Yuan in China. And she asked, what is the future plan for the Silk Road Virtual Museum? Honestly, guys, I did not plant this question. So thank you very much for putting it. We're going to do several things. The first thing is we've got several gaps still to fill in the overland Silk Road. For example, we haven't really done any justice to the Song dynasty in China. And we also have the Seljuks in the Anatolia and the early Ottomans that we haven't dealt with yet. So we're filling in those gaps along the Silk Road. Then, if you following our wonderful maps in our walkthrough, you will have noticed that we haven't really touched India. And so it's my plan before the end of this year that we will have launched at least 3 or 4 new exhibitions devoted to the cultures of the Indian subcontinent. So that's that to look forward to. Now, the third thing is that we're working at the moment with Flyover Zone. Now, Flyover Zone does 3D reconstructions and walkthroughs using virtual reality. And we're working together with them to build a museum and a walkthrough of a historical site, which is their basic skill. And we'll be doing that together at the moment. And for you, this might be a nice surprise, but Winterco started off with the Forbidden City in Beijing, and we'll be having a special exhibition devoted to the Emperor Yongle, the Yongle Emperor, who was largely responsible for it. And the last thing we hope to do is to add local languages in oral audio frames to our exhibitions. Now, we started this right at the very beginning, but it became too costly and too time-consuming to continue. So we'd like to pick that up again. But of course, a lot of that will rely on the support that we get for building the museum and continuing it. We have no external funds at the moment, so we rely very much on the generosity and support of our friends and subscribers. So it's at the bottom of the website if you feel tempted. It only remains for me to give a warm thanks for all of you for coming here today, to hope that you enjoy the richness of the new exhibitions. We have over 15, 20 new exhibitions for you to explore. So that's hundreds of new exhibits and lots of new stories. And I'd also like to thank the team behind us with Blue Ninja and the rest. I won't name them all, they'll be unfamiliar to you. But we've had their support from the beginning, from Kunstmatrix as well, without which, basically, from this side, you'd be looking at a blank screen and you'd be looking at vain for a Silk Road Virtual Museum, because simple, it would not have been there. So thank you all very much. I hope to see you in the following days. Subscribe to the newsletter if you really want to know what's going on. We don't overwhelm you with correspondence, but you'll know when new events are coming up. And once again, thank you very, very much for your participation. Thank you to all our speakers. And there's nothing more for me to do now than to wish you a very pleasant stay, a visit to the new museums, which are open now for you to look at, and to say goodbye until next time. So from me, over and out.